We're in the final stages of the big ticket event that is, of course, the G20 Summit that is to be held in the national capital. What are the expectations from different countries? We have with us to discuss the expectations, particularly of Mexico. The Mexican ambassador here to India, Mr. Federico Salas, is joining us. Thank you so much, Mr. Salas, for speaking to us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us again, sir. So may I begin by asking you, what are the expectations of Mexico from this particular G20 Summit?
Well, there's a few things. On a general note, I would say that one thing that the Indian presidency has been very emphatic about is that this should be an action-oriented G20, and that the summit should come up with some sort of practical recommendations or an outcome that will have a practical meaning in terms of the many issues that have been discussed. Questions of development, of finance, of energy, health, tourism, so it has been a very broad agenda. And so what we're expecting, of course, is to see a final document that will reflect all of the concerns that and the priorities that many of our countries have presented forward, but again also with an action-oriented framework, so that it can be effective and not just words on paper.
Which are the areas, which are the working groups, for instance, that Mexico has been a little more focused on? Because India has said that this is a G20 which would be focused on the concerns of the global South. In that regard, particularly, which are these areas which are priorities for Mexico?
Well, certainly the whole question of development and how to beef up the issues of development that are of greater concern of the global South, but not only of the global South, but certainly that is one of them. The issue of financial stability across the board. We have also focused on other issues such as what to do about how to address climate change and the negative effects of climate change, which also has an impact on development. But I must say that many of the issues that were discussed in the different working groups of the G20 also have an incidence of questions of development, such as, for example, questions like health, questions like tourism. For example, tourism is one of the largest sources of income in Mexico as an industry. So, it's a very important issue for us. Questions of agriculture, the issues of food stability and food availability around the world. For example, also India has tried to focus this G20 on women-led development. And that is something that also Mexico has been very forceful about. We have a feminist foreign policy in place in Mexico, so we were very happy to see that this is moving forward.
Right, absolutely. Also, this is one G20 where, these are concerns, there are areas of concerns, as you said, in terms of tourism, in terms of agriculture, but these are common concerns. So do you see countries working together, more than, just the aspects of trade, working together, collaborating more in these particular areas, because there's so much that countries can learn from each other and their shared experiences?
Well, I think, that the work that was done in the working groups and that culminated in the different ministerials that took place in the past couple of months is precisely that. I think is, the G20 countries and also some of the guest countries coming together to agree on a whole set of measures and priorities that should be enforced towards the future, should be implemented. And that should also be implemented not only by the G20 countries, but should also include the rest of the world, and that's where the global South comes in. And I think that India did a very good job in bringing the voice of the global South. As you know, in January, the Prime Minister held a meeting with about 125 countries to hear their concerns, to hear their priorities, to hear what they wanted, what they expected to see as an outcome of this G20. That has been brought to the table. And of course, Mexico, as part of the global South, we're very happy to see that is taking place.
Right. Also, India and Mexico have often spoken in the past about a free trade agreement. Where have those talks reached, and is this something that you see happening in the near future?
Well, the proposal has been made. And we're studying the idea of the viability of a free trade agreement. But I must say that even without a free trade agreement, the trade relationship between Mexico and India has been flourishing, has been growing. The trade basket has been diversifying. We are now the #1 trading partner of India in Latin America. And also there's a very significant presence of Indian companies in Mexico, around 200, in very wide sectors from automotive to pharma to fertilizers, steel, etc. And also Mexico, for example, is the #1 in Latin American investor in India. So even without a free trade agreement so far, we're doing very well, and the trade is booming between our two countries.
Electric mobility, e-vehicles, that's another area that you have spoken about in the past, development of, lithium battery technology, so on and so forth. How do you see this as a key area? Because this is something that even India is focused about. You're here in the national capital. There's a lot of push for electric mobility, as you would have seen over the last few years over here. So where do you see this collaboration increase?
Well, we're working very closely with different industries from India on the whole question of the building of the vehicles, electrical vehicles, as well as the whole question of batteries for those vehicles. There's very advanced technology that has been developed here in India, and we are, as I said, we have been getting closer with some of the manufacturers here in India to see if, how to bring them to Mexico, or collaborate with Mexico in some of the work that we're also doing in electromobility, which is a very important issue. We are moving, as I was mentioning with the economic relationship, we're moving into this whole new area of issues, this kind of issues of innovation, not only electromobility, but also, for example, digital questions, which of course one of the aspects of the G20 having to do with, like, say, digital health. We have pushed very much for a dialogue between our startup companies, between Mexico and India. So that whole area of new technologies, innovation, etc., is something that we're very focused on right now in the relationship between Mexico and India.
Right, absolutely, no surprises there. India has, of course, a huge base when it comes to IT. But let me also take you across to the traditional sources of energy, because energy security, all of this has been a concern, particularly given that India is a huge importer of oil. Where do you see that relationship headed, particularly in the near future, given that there have been some Indian companies who have invested in Mexico, and certainly in terms of the current global scenario also, this is a huge issue of concern. How do you see this developing?
Well, Mexico has been, I think, in the basket of trade of goods that are traded between India and Mexico, oil plays a very important part. We are a large supplier of oil to India that gets refined here once it comes here to India. So I think that's going to be important for the foreseeable future. It's certainly, I think we're all, moving into now renewable energies, but we're still in that transitional phase where the reliance on some of these more traditional sources like oil itself will still last for a few more years.
Right. Also, to take off from there, the Russia-Ukraine conflict itself has had huge implications for the world. How do you see this being reflected in the final communique of the G20? We have seen in Bali, for instance, how there was a mention of now not being the time of war. What are you personally looking forward to, and Mexico looking forward to, in terms of how this is reflected in the final communique that comes out of the G20?
Well, I think there's going to be a reflection in the sense that there is an overall concern that has been expressed by most countries on the different subjects that have been dealt with on the working groups of the G20, that this conflict is having an impact on issues, for example, as energy supplies and prices of energy, especially oil, food prices, and the shortage of some grains around the world, fertilizers, and also the impact that this has had on the financial well-being around the world, the consequences which are clearly manifested in inflationary pressures in many of our countries. And I think that you will see that reflected very much across the line in what the G20 has been discussing. Of course, the actual step forward to try to resolve this issue, it is not in the G20 where this is going to happen. But nevertheless, I think that the G20 can can voice its concern that this is happening because it's having an overall impact on many other issues not directly related to the conflict itself.
Right. Also, we know that Xi Jinping is not going to be attending this particular event. Mr. Putin is not coming. But when it comes to China, we've seen in recent days how they have, redrawn the map showing various parts of various countries, including India and those surrounding the South China Sea. And all of them have raised serious issues with that, with what they call either cartographic war or cartographic aggression. As a diplomat, how do you see that?
Well, Mexico's has always been very, very firm in the fact that all of these issues can and should be dealt with in a peaceful fashion. And I think that all of the countries of this region, should have a dialogue, talk about these things, and not let it fester and become a source of conflict. And we certainly hope that this type of different views or controversies, or whichever way you want to define it, are resolved through peaceful means.
Right. One of the big achievements of India in recent weeks, and you would see that, is that India successfully became the only country to land at the South Pole of the moon. Space exploration is an area where we've seen Mexico and India talk about in the past how they can cooperate. Do you see this as an important area of cooperation as well?
It is an important area of cooperation. Let me say at this point also that we're very happy and we congratulate India for this very remarkable success. But yes, the Space Agency of Mexico and ISRO here in India, we have been cooperating for quite a number of years. And just recently, for example, we signed, in the past year or so, we signed an agreement so that we are cooperating on observation from space on how to deal with natural disasters such as forest fires. And I think, this is one of the issues that, sometimes people don't think about it, but, space exploration has enormous benefits for those of us that are down here on Earth in terms of alerting us and letting us or helping us to deal with some of the crises that we have here on land.
Yes, because India has this a vast experience and long experience in remote sensing particularly. So you think that is something that could very practically be of help to
Absolutely,
Mexico?
And we are already cooperating in that regard. The Mexican Space Agency and ISRO are already cooperating in that regard.
Right. And beyond trade, beyond diplomacy, there's also the entire issue of cultural ties between India and Mexico. We all know Mexico has a huge amount of influence here in India. Perhaps, of course, there is always scope for that to grow. How do you see this, growing in terms of the soft power or the cultural aspect of ties between the two countries? For example, Mexican food is very popular in India. Yes. There's various sports that are popular. Both countries have interest in football. How do you see all of this gaining?
And Mexican food, Indian food is also increasingly popular in Mexico, I must say. But we're two countries that have heirs to ancient civilizations with a very rich culture. We're both, one after the other in terms of in the list of World Heritage Sites of the UNESCO list. So in that sense, I think that there's a lot that we have been doing and that we will continue to do in the future, because there's obviously so much that we can share. There's many similarities, but at the same time, there's so much more than we can learn from each other, best practices on how to preserve our heritage. And for example, one issue that has been discussed within the G20 is the whole question where India and Mexico are working very closely together to work against the illicit trafficking of cultural goods, of heritage aspects, which I think is very important, because we both are countries that have archaeological sites, many of which have suffered a lot of plundering in the past. So it's very important, and this is part of the work that we're doing together, and that we're very happy to see that this has been taken up certainly by the G20.
And have other countries been responsive to the concerns of those countries like India and Mexico who've lost their artifacts and are probably sitting in museums in either Europe or United States or wherever it may be?
I think there has been an acknowledgement that this is something that we should be all fighting about, that this is something of concern. Of course, it's a long way before we reach a resolution of all the cases that are pending, but at least there is a dialogue going on, there's an understanding, and there's of the concern that countries like Mexico, like India have to preserve the richness of our cultural heritage.
All right, sir. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for speaking to us here at Times Now.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.